On the morning of June 30th, 1994, a woman and her two nephews roamed Crescent Beach in Rhode Island. Buried treasure was the children's goal. What they found instead seemed to have been buried alive. Detective Arthur Clark of the East Providence Police Department was called to investigate the buried woman at the beach. The scene was more reminiscent of a Stephen King novel than anything the veteran detective had seen in person. 2 feet beneath the surface lay a woman in a red satin cocktail dress. Her life had been ended by multiple blows to the head.
We arrived on the scene about 10:15. We verified they were human arms. It appeared a body was buried in a shallow grave. We notified the medical examiner's office, who responded.
The victim's arms jutted out from beneath the sand, her hands clawing skyward in what seemed a final grasp for life. It seemed unlikely that she'd been buried alive. The medical examiner concluded that in her condition, the victim wouldn't have the strength to push her hands up through the sand. Someone had posed her into this final gesture, like a scene from a horror film. The killer seemed to be leaving a calling card, but his message was inscrutable. A circular pattern had been pressed into the sand around the body. In it lay a shattered watch face, its hands frozen at midnight. But for detectives, time raced forward. It seemed that some sort of grotesque ritual was performed here. They feared it could be the beginning of killings to come. They needed to work quickly before this killer struck again. At this early stage of investigation, vital clues might be masquerading as common trash. Cigarette butts, candy wrappers, and plastic cups were collected from the scene, along with samples of sand from both the surface and the bottom of the grave.
At the time, we didn't know what was evidence and what was not. So on the side of caution, we collected what we thought could end up being evidence.
Once we put the tape out, there's been nobody else in the area.
But before Clark could make sense of the eerie spectacle, he'd have to learn more about the victim. He didn't have to look far.
At around 8 o'clock that evening, a gentleman by the name of Christopher Hutter, who lived in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, called the Pawtucket police to report his wife missing.
The missing woman was 30-year-old Kendra Hutter. From a photograph, Clark recognized her as the murder victim. According to her husband, Kendra and he had lived more like roommates than lovers. Beyond the facade of domestic contentment dwelt a loveless marriage, bound together by financial need and parental obligation. They agreed to date other people. Christopher Hutter told police that Kendra had a date the night she died. Police later learned she met him through a personal ad. The divorced white male described himself as a cheerful, attractive father. Hoping to add a dash of romance to her life, she contacted him and they arranged for a date. On the night of June 29th, Kendra scribbled the man's name and phone number for her husband. The card read, Gary. Detective Clark identified Gary as Gary Tassone, a truck driver who lived with his mother and brother in Cumberland. He told police that he'd had 3 dates with Kendra Hutter, but denied having been with her on the night of her murder. The personable Tassone did his best to help Clark, telling police that he knew Kendra and her husband were having marital trouble. He suggested that perhaps the disgruntled Christopher Hutter was the murderer. When Tassone told Clark he'd been to the beach where the body was found, Clark asked him to come to the station to continue questioning.
After taking his first statement, there were several things that didn't jive. There were some inconsistencies in what he told us and what we had learned up until then.
In an interview with police, recreated here, Tassone adamantly denied having been with Kendra Hutter the night of the murder. As the interview wore on, however, he revised his story. He admitted he'd been on a date with her that night, but dropped her off around 11 o'clock. But that contradicted what Kendra's husband reported. According to him, Kendra never made it home that night. As far as they could tell, Tassone was the last person to see the victim alive. The detectives pressed on.
Detective Bilodeau and I spoke to him on and off for about 4 hours that evening. He never displayed any signs of emotion. He spoke very well. He was articulate, polite, cool, calm. He was not nervous at all. Pretty just matter of fact.
Clark continued to question Tassone, and as the interview moved into its 5th grueling hour, Tassone finally offered up an account. He and Kendra had been building sand castles when a noise startled him, causing him to inadvertently strike her in the head. In a panic, he buried the body in the sand. Considering the extent of Kendra Hutter's injuries, 7 strikes to the head, Clark rejected the story. There was no question in the detective's mind that the victim was killed intentionally.